The evening of January 2nd, 2020, emergency services responded to a house fire outside of Bismarck, North Dakota. Inside they found 42-year-old Chad Entzel dead from an apparent suicide. But as more details were uncovered, it became increasingly obvious that there was no suicide. Investigators began piecing together a timeline of events leading up to the murder, and it kept leading back to one person. It was Christmas time for the Entzel family in Bismarck, North Dakota, where they lived in late 2019. 42-year-old Chad had proposed to Nikki Sue at the wedding reception of a close friend a few years prior. They were married in May 2016 and were raising Nikki's two sons, Marcus and Christopher. Chad had quite a few hobbies. He coached at Little League, loved amateur race car driving, often played golf and darts, and was part of a bowling league. Nikki, apart from being a busy mother, also loved baking, and she ran a catering company. The Entzels rented a house outside of Bismarck, which is in Burleigh County. On the morning of Thursday, January 2nd, just before 9 a.m., Nikki began to receive phone calls and texts from a few of Chad's coworkers. He had not turned up to work that morning, and he could not be reached. They were growing progressively more concerned. Nikki was at work and had meetings lined up that morning with clients. She did not know where Chad was, and her schedule had her tied up all day. Chad's colleagues contacted the police for a welfare check at the house. When they arrived, they found Chad's truck parked in the drive, but there was no answer at the door. The view inside the house from the front and side windows did not reveal anything concerning, but aside from his vehicle, there was no sign of Chad. After Nikki finished work for the day, she drove out to the house. When she tried to enter, she was met with a waft of smoke billowing out from inside. Nikki called 911.
I came out here to check. My husband sent a text message that he didn't come in today, and I've been there 3 days, and so I'm coming here to check. And I walked in, I opened the door, and I walked in, and the house is smoky. I can't get in the door. It's smoky in the house.
Okay, so you see smoke?
I can see inside the,
Okay.
and like our wash is black, and it's smoky in there, and I can't get in the door.
Okay, do you see any flames at all?
I don't know.
Okay, and you were coming here to check on who again? I'm sorry?
Check on my husband. I've been out for a few days,
Okay.
and his work called and said he didn't come in at all. And I tried calling him, no answers. They tried calling him, no answer. So I said, I was just swamped. I couldn't get away at work today, and I'm coming out now because I'm off work, and I can't get in the door. And when I looked, everything's black. So I said, guys, so I'm going to check.
Slow, okay. Nikki, calm down for me, okay? Nikki.
The Bismarck Fire Department were the first to arrive on scene. They entered the house and began putting out the flames inside. There were two areas where the fire had taken hold. The main fire was in the master bedroom, where a mattress was left smoldering and the walls and ceiling melted the wallpaper and paint from the walls. When the smoke cleared in the bedroom, the fire rescue team found Chad Entzel. He was deceased, unclothed, lying on the floor. Despite the fire damage, there were indications as to what had happened to Chad. A shotgun was located nearby, resting on the bed. A heater was knocked over on the floor at the end of the bed. This heater was the most likely source of the fire in that room. In the basement, a second fire was discovered burning on top of the furnace. It was put out in less than 10 seconds. The cover to the furnace had been removed and was resting, propped up, on the floor nearby, suggesting it had been dislodged before the fire had started and not as a result of it. Also a few feet away on the ground was a torn and empty package of Marlboro cigarettes. Fire marshals noted this piece of rubbish as a potential source of ignition for the basement fire. They also contacted the ATF to check the house for explosives. None were found. As other agencies and emergency responders arrived at the scene, the house was searched for any other potential victims. The two boys were thankfully staying with their grandparents for the holidays and nowhere near the home when the fire started. Only Chad Entzel was found inside. There was one unfired round left in the shotgun near to Chad. Two empty liquor bottles were also discovered in the room. The heater could have tipped over accidentally onto a potentially flammable mattress. At first glance, the evidence pointed to suicide, but further investigation would quickly rule this out as a possibility. Chad was found lying on the floor, but the shotgun was on the bed a few feet away, and an autopsy would reveal not one, but 2 gunshot wounds, an impossibility if they were self-inflicted. This meant that the round that remained in the gun had to have been loaded after Chad was shot. The only reason to do so would be if the shooter intended to trick investigators into believing the death was a suicide. The autopsy could not determine whether Chad's blood alcohol level indicated that he had been drinking before he died, as the empty bottles left in the room implied. It seemed that he was deceased for some time before he was discovered, which meant this was difficult to determine. There were no identifiable signs in the autopsy that Chad had been a regular heavy drinker. Was it possible that these bottles were part of the staged scene? The fire on the bed was described as spotty in nature, which was an indication that an ignitable liquid was used to accelerate the blaze at points, and perhaps there had been multiple attempts to get it going. But there was also the second blaze in the basement, which had started independent of the one in the bedroom, was deemed far too coincidental. This second fire also supported the theory of a staged scene. The amount of soot in the house was evidence of a fire that was starved for oxygen. The door to the bedroom had been left only partially open, which would have stifled the growing flames inside the room, despite whatever accelerant had been used to start it. Testing was conducted to determine what set the fire alight, but in the meantime, trained dogs indicated the use of an ignitable liquid. Burleigh County Sheriff's Office called in the state's Bureau of Criminal Investigation to assist, as well as conferring with the FBI and experts at the ATF. Amongst the first steps taken in the investigation involved scouring surveillance footage and cell phone records for the days leading up to the fire on January 2nd. Chad's cell phone and his iPad had been recovered from the house. Through his correspondence, investigators learned that Chad had been alone in the house for days leading up to his death while his wife Nikki was out of town. Text messages from Nikki to Chad, beginning the day after Christmas, December 26th, lasting through to the 30th, suggested that Nikki was away for some kind of training for work to better her skills. "You always succeed at whatever you do," Chad had messaged his wife only days before his death. Investigators tracked Chad's last public sighting to the evening of December 30th. That night he was with his bowling league and captured arriving at Midway Lanes at roughly 6 p.m. That night he had an exchange with his wife over text message, joking about bowling a 300, a perfect score. He was shown leaving the bowling alley at about 20 minutes past 10. That was the last time Chad was seen alive. The Entzel's rental house was equipped with a security system, including surveillance cameras and door sensors. An activity log for the system could also be accessed, which showed the account activity as well as any recordings made by the cameras. At 10:50 p.m. on December 30th, roughly the time when Chad should have been captured by the cameras returning home from the bowling alley, the camera recording was corrupted and the footage was unwatchable. However, sensors showed the garage door opening and the system disarming at that time. Chad must have returned home. There was no indication that he left the house at any time after this. At just past 1 a.m. that same night, now December 31st, the sensor for the garage door to the Entzel house again recorded that it had opened. Whoever had done so entered the house with Chad inside. At 2:56 a.m., the door was closed. There was no further activity that night. The next morning, Nikki Sue Entzel gave her husband's work a call. She said that he was unwell, so he would not be making it in that day. But she had not spent the previous night at home with him. Nikki Sue had been staying at a hotel. Nikki was the central person of interest after her husband was found. She was brought in for questioning. The home security system showed multiple attempts under her account to access and disable the cameras into privacy mode. These adjustments were made only hours before the system managed to nonetheless record Nikki visiting the house. Whatever adjustments she had tried to make did not work. And when she arrived at the house, she was not alone. With her was a male acquaintance, someone she described to police as a family friend named Earl Roy Howard. Amongst the first questions that the sheriff's team had for Nikki related to her relationship with this man. Earl, 41 years old and a Canadian from Bellwood, Ontario, was just a friend. He was a project manager who was traveling to Bismarck to scope potential pieces of work. Although Nikki insisted that her relationship with Earl was innocent, she also made it clear that her marriage was in trouble.
Who's your friend? Earl.
And
Is he, is he a neighbor or something, or what?
no, it was just next to the area. Just ordered food like in the house and serving a repeat customer and hanging out and being friends with us and
Yeah.
everything else and
Oh, so Chad knew him too?
yeah, just
Okay.
became friends and
What did he think
kids
of
know.
all this stuff?
he was so sweet. You're better than that. He said that he goes, they can't tell you how to live your life.
Nikki told the Deputy Burleigh County Sheriff that her husband Chad would hurt her. She claimed that her husband had a whiskey drinking problem and could turn violent. He called it his drinking game, she said. In support of this story were her final texts to him on the day he was found dead. "Are you playing your drinking game?" she asked, receiving no response. Through on and off sobbing, she spoke of her troubled marriage and, more recently, arguments they held over a broken furnace. Nikki explained that in the dead of winter with no heat, she had no choice but to leave the house and stay at a hotel. The same furnace that was allegedly not working was the one found alight by firefighters.
And a coat on, or that sweater.
Okay, good.
So,
Yeah.
just grabbed something we loved and, I keep that for this.
After calming Nikki down, the deputy explained that he knew how Chad died, but not why. He believed that Nikki was in a position to fill in the missing pieces.
I'm going to say that Chad's death was not an accident.
What? Mm-hmm.
Based off of all the information that I've gathered, Chad's death was not an accident. We know how this happened. And Nikki, I think you know how too.
I know. That's why I asked you.
Chad did not die in the fire. Okay?
Okay.
Chad was killed by a gunshot.
What?
He was killed by a firearm.
What?
The tenor of the discussion then shifted when BCI Special Agent Joe Arends entered the room.
Hi.
He's with Bureau of Criminal Investigations.
No,
Hello.
And
I have to go some.
To this point, Nikki had spent hours responding to questions as a confused, mistreated, and distraught widow. Security cameras at the Staybridge Hotel, where Nikki had checked in days before the murder, showed her with family friend Earl Howard. The two were staying in one room together, registered under his name. The cameras at the house also revealed Nikki and Earl's activities together. At just before 7 p.m., the night that Chad was at the bowling alley, Nikki and Earl visited the house. Over about an hour and a half, the two of them carried laundry baskets of items, as well as piles of clothing and other objects, from the house and into Earl's truck. Further footage showed repeated trips to and from Earl's white pickup truck into the hotel, carrying the many bundles of items taken from the Entzel house.
Open out to the house with me, we grabbed some stuff and left. So,
So what did Chad think of you going and staying in a hotel room with Earl?
Investigators clearly believed that Nikki and Earl were carrying on an affair. But more importantly, they had cleared out items from the house with the knowledge that a fire would shortly break out on the property, likely because one or both of them was responsible for setting it. But the house visit that the investigators were more interested in took place later that night at 1 a.m., when Chad would have been at the house and not heard from again after. At first, Nikki told the deputy that she had left the hotel with Earl late that night, but only to go see Christmas lights. Eventually, she admitted to going to the house. She needed to locate some of her medication, she said. Just before leaving, however, Nikki accessed the security system remotely and placed the cameras in privacy mode. They would not be able to capture what was about to happen at the house. Why had she and Earl returned to the house at that time of night? And what had occurred between them and Chad during that time?
Something happened at that time, and whether you stepped out in the garage, stayed out in the kitchen, something happened in that house that led to Chad dying. Do I think you were probably standing there? No.
I don't know.
But I think that you were there. You were on that property at the time when it happened.
I don't know what happened.
So you went out there, got some stuff while Chad was bored, right? Right. Then you went back out there in the early morning hours, like 10 after 1. And again, we're looking at it, you had been out. You had been on the camera system, switching it to privacy mode, which just didn't, for some reason, did not work. I don't know why it didn't work. It didn't work. And then you guys show up out there. You're there for an hour and 40 minutes. Right? I know, you said that. Then you come back 3 hours later. I get that. I know that. Mm-hmm. It doesn't make any sense to me that you were there for an hour and 40 minutes and couldn't figure out where those patches were, but then you can go out at 6:30 in the morning when you have had no sleep at all.
If somebody's arguing with
had no
me, if somebody's
epiphany and just knew where they were.
if somebody's arguing, they weren't there.
Nikki's patches, her medication, which she claimed to be unsuccessfully looking for at 1 a.m., and then returned to the house to search for again at 6:30 a.m., were found sitting in plain view on the shelving unit at the end of the kitchen counter when emergency services entered the home to put out the house fire. In a bizarre twist, nearly 6 hours into the interview, Nikki began adding some elements to her story. There was now a new person being introduced, a mystery man, that she claimed had been in the house with them that night. He had emerged from the basement and called her husband Hun. Also, according to Nikki, Chad had a gambling problem. Perhaps all of these sudden revelations will explain everything.
I'm just trying to wrap my head around this. Obviously, I mean, why did you never tell me this before? That would have told me so much more. So that's why I don't understand why now. There is, I understand dignity, but there's nothing dignity about what happened to Chad. But that's what I want you to have dignity too. Chad, deep in debt with gambling. What?
Gambling.
That was another thing. Why didn't you tell me that?
I don't know where no gamblers are. Families for gambling.
Nikki, this isn't making sense to me. How would you know this guy? How would you not mention that I was there? Where?
She described the mystery man, and with the assistance of her interviewers, she attempted to gauge the man's height. Finally, after many hours and many contradictions, a version of what may have happened to Chad began to emerge. Nikki said that she left the house that night and waited in the vehicle outside while Earl remained in the house for several minutes. During this time, she heard a gunshot ring out from inside. Moments later, Earl joined her in the vehicle and informed her that Chad was dead. They drove back to the hotel together. Nikki provided a written confession containing these details. Then, upon further contemplation, she thought better of providing the statement and attempted to destroy it.
You don't have to be like that about it.
On December 26th, when Nikki texted her husband that she was at work, receipts and security footage revealed that Nikki had actually just caught a one-way flight to Minneapolis. Over the next 2 days, as she continued to text her husband about work training, Nikki made her way back to Bismarck by road, but she did not return home. Instead, Nikki checked into the Staybridge Hotel with Earl Howard, whom she had met in Minneapolis. Messaging history between the two going back months revealed a romantic affair which had progressed to exchanging messages about a house purchase. Nikki and Earl were scoping large, expensive properties in Austin, Texas. She had even arranged a couple of job interviews in the area over the coming weeks in preparation for the move. And there were other plans in the works. On the day after her flight, Nikki contacted Homesite Insurance to take out a renter's insurance policy on her home, with her name as the sole beneficiary. This policy would pay out up to $26,000 if the contents in the home were damaged or destroyed. She also sought additional coverage for all of the jewelry that Chad had purchased for her over the years. This was a conservative amount of coverage compared to the life insurance policy that she held for Chad, which totaled over $500,000.
So would you say that $20,000 is enough to replace your personal belongings?
I don't know, I'm gonna say I have like $5,000 in just jewelry.
Okay. You had the jewelry appraised, or was it purchased recently?
I had my wedding ring appraised, and I had the earrings appraised, and then I bought other stuff recently, and I have copies of everything, because I always go just to one jewelry store. I always buy from one jewelry store, period.
Okay.
So, I always buy just from one jewelry store. And I have copies of everything.
Or all the appraisals dated within the last 3 years?
Yep.
On January 1st, the day after Chad was shot and a day before he was found, Nikki and Earl visited the jewelry store where Chad had shopped. There, they collected the sales receipts for pairs of earrings, rings, and a wedding set. Then, on January 3rd, the day after her husband was discovered, Nikki placed a claim for the renter's insurance and extended coverage of her other items. A few days after that, she contacted Chad's employer to inquire about potential payouts from them, as well as placing her claim for the life insurance money. Nikki Sue Entzel was arrested on January 7th and charged with conspiracy to commit murder, conspiracy to commit arson, and conspiracy to tamper with physical evidence. Earl Howard was also arrested on the same charges. 2 days later, in Michigan, at the US-Canada border, as he attempted to drive home to Bellwood, a small town about 100 kilometers west of Toronto. Neither Nikki nor Earl was charged with murder because ballistic experts were unable to determine which one of them had pulled the trigger. There were a series of delays bringing the case to trial. First, Earl Howard sought a trial separate from Nikki, arguing that her criminal history, which included acts of financial fraud, showed that she was independently capable of what was being charged: murder for insurance money. He did not want to be associated with her prior bad acts. But this request was denied. The two were to stand trial together. Coronavirus caused delay, but another setback came in autumn 2021 as jury selection was meant to begin. News came that Earl Howard had decided to accept a plea deal. He was given a 50-year sentence with 25 years withheld in exchange for pleading guilty to conspiracy to commit murder, arson, attempted arson, and conspiracy to tamper with evidence. He was also placed on the prosecution's witness list for the pending trial of his former flame, Nikki Sue. At the beginning of 2022, Nikki's public defender filed a request to withdraw from the case, citing a breakdown in communication between himself and the defendant. The details of what transpired are hidden by attorney-client privilege, but this request was approved. It was again only weeks before the new trial was meant to commence.
At this point, I know we're late in the game and I wouldn't be filing a motion to withdraw if I didn't feel it was absolutely necessary at this point, but there's been a breakdown in the attorney-client relationship at this point, which I believe leaves me no option but to withdraw.
It was late September 2022 before another date was set. This time, the trial began in earnest. Earl Howard's bank statement showed the purchase of a gas welding torch kit from a Praxair at the cost of over $300 the day before the murder. It was months later that investigators would connect this purchase to a photo they had taken of the interior of the Entzel family garage. This photo showed the top of the torch kit. Investigators returned to the property and confiscated the torch kit as evidence. The tanks in the kit, containing highly flammable and potentially explosive liquid, were empty. Investigators linked the liquid to the one identified as igniting the mattress next to Chad Entzel. It was further established that the cigarette package, noted only feet away from the furnace fire, matched the brand found in Earl's pickup truck, and was a possible ignition source for that fire. Nikki continued to point the finger at Earl as the person who pulled the trigger and started the fires. She also continued to argue that Chad had been a violent drunk and that she had suffered as his wife. In her opening statement, prosecutor Julie Ann Lawyer provided a thorough and damning timeline of the crime. She showed images of Nikki and Earl on the road together as a couple. She showed their movement to and from the hotel where they shared Earl's room. She outlined how the failed attempts to disable the Entzel security system at the house were immediately followed by multiple visits by the scheming couple. First to save Nikki's belongings from the planned fire, later that night to commit the murder, then again the next morning to reignite the blaze that had failed to stay alight. The state argued that Nikki called Chad in sick that morning to allow for more time for the fire to take hold.
The first thing she told them, there was something wrong with the furnace, it wasn't working. She and Chad had argued about that and she had left. Now keep in mind, January 2nd, 2020 was on a Thursday. She indicated she'd left the home on the Sunday or Monday before, which would have been December 29th or December 30th of 2019. Because she's got medical conditions, the furnace wasn't working, the house was too cold, she couldn't stay there. So she left. They came back to the house on December 31st, 2019 at approximately 1 o'clock in the morning. Door sensors tell us that. And they left at approximately 3 o'clock in the morning. The last time anyone saw Chad Entzel alive was leaving bowling on December 30th, 2019 at approximately 10:30 p.m. Between 1 and 3 a.m. on December 31st, 2019, Chad Entzel was shot twice with a shotgun and left dead in the home with a fire started. When they wake up December 31st, there's no news of a fire. You know, in Bismarck, that's good news. It's all over the headlines. House fire in Bismarck. There was nothing like that. So at approximately 6:30 in the morning on December 31st, they went back to the house. The house wasn't burned down. So they repositioned the propane heater, and Nikki goes to work and calls Chad in sick to work, buying them some more time. Door sensors at the home showed that they were at the house at least one more time, trying to start that fire. The house still hadn't caught fire, so again, the fire was started on the furnace.
It was further offered by 2 furnace technicians that there was little to nothing actually wrong with the furnace that was found on fire.
That the tank was actually shut off. The manual shut off was actually turned off by somebody.
So were you able to open it back up and get it working again?
Yes.
The defense had little to work with aside from pointing the finger back at Earl Howard. Family members and other witnesses who had known Chad well insisted that he was nonviolent and only drank socially. Chad was not the type of person who sought confrontation or escalated disputes.
Do you know Chad Entzel?
Yes.
How do you know him?
Him and I were married for 17 years.
Did he ever drink to excess?
No.
Did you ever see him intoxicated?
Maybe once a year at a Christmas party.
Did you ever see him get violent when he drank?
No.
Did you ever see him violent at all?
No.
You really haven't seen him in 5 years, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Married to him for 17.
Yeah. People can change in 5 years. Maybe.
I don't believe to that extent.
No further questions, yeah.
Nikki Sue did not take the stand. If she had, her past criminal history, which was never introduced, would have come out in court. The defense deferred their opening statement and called no witnesses. In his closing argument, defense attorney Thomas Glass put forward one central contention. There were 2 individuals charged with conspiring to murder Chad Entzel and set the house on fire. So where was Earl Howard, and why had he not taken the stand for the prosecution?
It's just interesting that he's not here. Why? Where he's going to say there was no plan to murder Chad? I don't know. All we do know is that during the interview, he tells law enforcement that Earl stated to her, the less you know, the better. That doesn't sound like a plan or an agreement to me.
It is possible that the state deemed Earl Howard's testimony against his ex-lover as unnecessary, and the question of who actually pulled the trigger introduced some ambiguity. But the state had built a strong and detailed timeline based on cell phone data, security camera footage, sensors, insurance policies, and Nikki Sue's own lies to law enforcement.
During her grief period, remember how she's crying, Sergeant Silvernagel, and reaching out to him and looking for comfort and saying how much she misses Chad and she just wants him back. Remember the horribly abusive alcoholic husband that she doesn't want to be around, that she avoids home for. She just misses him and wants him back so bad. On January 4th, 2 days after he's found deceased at 11:42 p.m., Nikki forwards an email to Earl about houses she received that are for sale. The plan consisted of shooting Chad, starting the house on fire to destroy any evidence, to collect on the insurance, and to stage the scene and remove evidence to make it look like a suicide, so that 1, the evidence would be destroyed and law enforcement wouldn't know what happened, and 2, so that they could live happily ever after in Texas.
They called 44 witnesses in total. It took the jury about 2 hours to return a verdict on all counts.
As to the charge of conspiracy to commit murder, we find the defendant Nikki Sue Melissa Entzel guilty. Conspiracy to commit arson. As to the charge of conspiracy to commit arson, we find the defendant Nikki Sue Melissa Entzel guilty. Conspiracy to tamper with physical evidence.
Judge Douglas Barr ordered a pre-sentence investigation report to be created, which will outline any considerations that should impact on the severity of Nikki's sentence. As of this video's publication, a sentencing hearing has not been set.
Very kind, didn't have a bad word to say about anybody, always willing to give a helping hand. I mean, really, he was my first friend. We grew up together a lot, just him and I, so just hearing some of those things that came out was just heartbreaking, knowing that they were not true.
And that was the story of the murder of Chad Entzel and the conviction of his wife Nikki and her lover Earl. Thanks so much for watching. I'm Kevin, this is Just Thought Lounge, and I'll see you in the next one.